Bliss and Grit is an entirely listener-supported show. Supporting us is also designed to support you through keeping the episodes rolling, but also through rewards for your donation, like a Getting Started guide, a private forum, and downloadable meditations. To become a supporting member, you can visit patreon.com/bliss and grit. Hello, beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're having conversations about the awakening spiritual path and what does that even mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, the beauty and the crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? Thank you for being here as a listener. We hugely appreciate it. If you want to stay up to date on all things Bliss and Grit and get a weekly digest of the resources that we are currently loving, you can go to blissandgrit.com to subscribe. And if you're wanting more in-depth support as you navigate your own path and internal process, we both see clients privately. So feel free to go to the website for more information on that as well. The last thing before we head into the conversation, we do sometimes curse. So if you are in non-swearing company, you may want to wear headphones. Okay, here we go.
Hello, Brooke.
Hello, Vanessa.
Happy almost New Year.
Happy almost New Year. For those listening, it might be, because we weren't sure, it might be, going out New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. It's 2020. It's funny. So many of you have been listening to us kind of for the whole journey, or you've joined us lately. But for those of you who've taken a deep dive, you may know Brooke and I are not huge on the New Year's goals.
No, not so much.
Not so much. I tend to kind of have lifelong aspirations, maybe more than yearly goals, but we realized it was a New Year's episode, and we're thinking about, like, do we have something that we would say about it being 2020, right, Brooke?
Yeah. What's the before picture? What's the after picture going to look like? I'm just joking.
We weren't coming up with anything, but we could say, dear listener, that if there was one wish we had for you in 2020, and frankly for the world in 2020, it would be that you are able to open up and receive more love and tenderness and kindness and softening from yourself and from others than ever before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so with that in mind, now this is going to seem like an awfully funny lead-in, but with that in mind, we thought we would talk about something that helps Brooke and I have a more expansive exploration around trauma and emotion and healing for ourselves. And that I think it's fair for me to say, Brooke, for both of us have seen in clients that as they take this in, it can open up a more expansive feeling. So we want to speak a little bit about intergenerational trauma. And we mention it on the show every once in a while, right? We've dropped little bits of seeds here and there. And the thing is that I don't think Brooke or I consider ourselves experts on this topic.
No, I will say for myself, for sure, not.
For sure,
so that's not the point of view that we're talking about it from.
Yeah. So it's going to be a conversation that is loaded with our own questions and loaded with our own explorations. But as you may have noticed over the years, we think there's real power in story and in sharing inquiry and in sharing the journey. And so this is something that feels really alive to us, and we thought we would dive into it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think this is one place I want to start, and then we'll see where we go from here, Brooke. But I recently, you know how as your consciousness seems to, I don't know if expand is the right word, but as you experience shifts in consciousness, all of a sudden something becomes clear to you, like the hand in front of your face clear, like, oh, of course, right? And you and I have spoken about intergenerational trauma or ancestral trauma, as some people would call it, for a long time between us. And of course, sometimes on the podcast. So I don't know when this shift occurred, but not that long ago, I was sitting and just, it was clear as day how affected we are by the trauma of our family. And I mean, of course, our parents, our grandparents, and going farther back in a way that I don't even know where it stops, right? I haven't even been able to trace it. But in sitting with enough people and in doing a deep dive into my own healing process, it's clear as day to me that some of what we're meeting within ourselves and some of the struggles and the beliefs that we're confronting within us are not even originating within our life, within our, let's say, personal history or personal circumstances. And I think that's a huge thing to take into account when you're in this journey of healing and awakening and meeting trauma within yourself. So is that a vague enough place for us to just start for me to pass the baton to you? Yeah.
We'll just see. And of course, as you're talking, I was following tendrils of about 5 different ways that could go. So just to speak a little bit to why do we think this could be relieving? Why do we think this could free up some space? Because I can also see the point of view of oh, fuck. Like, I'm not an autonomous being. I have to heal all these people's stuff in my family, most of whom I've never even met. Like, am I just some machine for cleansing family karma? It can feel a little not the nicest when seen from that point of view. And, one of the reasons why my mind can go there is because I had, like a lot of us, more caretaking than I should have had to do as a child. So I can see how it goes through that route, right? Of like, can I just exist already for me?
Sure.
So from the other side, the other point of view of this, the reason why it's very freeing is that it takes us away from the route of something we did wrong. Like we're not good enough at healing yet, or we haven't uncovered enough of our psychological history yet, or we haven't achieved enough spiritual realization yet. There's just a way that we can be really shame-filled towards ourselves about, why haven't I gotten over all of these things in the most thorough way possible yet? What's wrong with me that I still have pain or anxiety or depression or fear? Yeah. Like, we can be so hard on ourselves on the healing journey. It can make us more neurotic, if we don't have it balanced out with other things, just joyfully enjoying life and friends and, lots of people we talk to about stuff other than trauma and awakening and these kinds of things. So when we realize that it's not just a matter of digging through our own histories relentlessly or shifting our way of being, and then feeling bad that it doesn't stick or that it's not 100% thorough. When we realize that, we come from lineages of all of us, this body came out of other bodies. It's made of my ancestors. And fun fact, so my son's in a history class that's about the history of the human species from the point of view of the history of the cosmos. Vanessa, you would fucking love it.
I'm already lit up. I'm like, and the
so it starts with your exactly. I'm going to get you some of the lessons for sure. There's a whole thing about your family tree that starts with the Big Bang. To like everything in you, alive as you are now, all of your elements, minerals, everything, started with the Big Bang, started with the formation of stars, blah, 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 blah. So that's way zoomed out. But those points of views can be so relieving because it's not just me, my little neurotic self who hasn't fixed it all up yet. Oh my God, we come from a lineage all the way back to the Big Bang. Like there's some shit in here, and there's some glory in here. There's all of the things in here. It can take us out of this small, painful point of view.
Yeah, it was the hardest on me. I like that you brought that in, Brooke. This kind of concept or understanding was the hardest on me when I was in the like deepest thick of it, right? Like the more pain I was grappling with, the more this concept was difficult to swallow. And the same with the more I felt in my small self, right? The more I was in my small self, the more I felt too small to bear it, right? I have already held enough. Why do I have to bear this too? I guess it's very similar with being an empath, right? Like at a certain point in life that felt like, oh no, everybody's feelings. And, it was because I had so much I didn't know how to meet and process within myself, right? And I didn't have enough spaciousness for it. So part of it just shifted as I had enough wherewithal to be like, right, okay, I can handle feelings, I can handle emotions. And then some of it just shifted because as we've been in a healing process and an awakening process, in a remembering process, it just feels like, well, this is what it is. It's not like a choice. It's not like, right. There's a God out there who's like your parent and didn't show up as an adult. And it's like, you have to now raise your family. It's just, it's a way of aligning with the truth of what our experiences as humans. Now, it's easier to align with that truth when you have a really cosmic perspective, not just the one you brought in, Brooke, but a remembrance of we are source and we are divine. When you have that at play, there's a whole different feeling tone around it and insight around it. And welcoming of it, because we are the consciousness that's here to clear some of the trauma out of the human lineage, and in the hopes, my belief, so that we can elevate as a whole, as a species. So from like the grand cosmic perspective, it's really cool. But until that feels real to you, that doesn't feel very helpful. It's not super real. But what is very close to your experiences, well, I just don't have a choice. Because what we were talking about before, Brooke, let's say, for example, you're like, I have been working with this wound, this belief of I'm alone, or this belief of I'm not worthy for so long. I looked at my childhood. I've done all of these things. How could this still be here? Or how could grief still be here? Or how could, fill in the blank? And when I started to see this within myself and within others, it added this greater perspective, this greater compassionate understanding of, oh, wow. Sometimes it's present still because of the depth and the breadth of it, because of the scope of it, because I haven't even yet begun to have compassion for it, because I haven't understood it in its fullness.
Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, I got nothing else. No, just kidding. So one of the other things I was thinking when you were talking is about how much this point of view has gotten me out of my self-absorption about the healing path. Like you're pointing to seeing oneness, right? That it's not just me sitting with all of these layers and coming up against these places that it doesn't matter how much I've put the puzzle together about why. And it doesn't matter how much sitting in stillness I've done, right? That this is the human condition and the mystery gets to come to the party. I don't know why. And it's not just me. And some people will resonate with that more than others who are listening. One of the things I've discovered about myself on my own healing path is that one of my stronger tendencies has been towards being self-pitying. Not everyone has that, but that's one of mine. And I don't feel bad about that. Like that was one of the things that for whatever reason, lineage or a personality choice that felt like it would keep me safe. Self-pitying was something I pulled out of the grab bag. But it keeps you, of course, in the small self because it's like, nobody suffers like me. Shout out to all my other Enneagram 4s out there. I love you guys. We're okay. It's okay that we have that. Nobody suffers like me. But when we start to see it from the larger perspective, it's like, literally everyone is sitting with this within greater or lesser degrees of awareness that they are sitting in this. And I do believe there are experiences of abiding awakeness that people have, friends and colleagues of ours, some of them. And having glimpsed what that feels like in glimpses, I don't know what it would feel like to be that way 100% of the time. So maybe it doesn't feel like the sitting with maybe there is another side. I don't know experientially. People we talk to talk about this. But it's just a very practical experience of oneness. It's a very tangible, we really are all in this together. This isn't my special, unique suffering. This isn't my special, unique journey. It's beautiful, but we're all metabolizing this stuff. And it's not necessarily that personal.
Right. Well, when we sat with Matt Kahn on our first retreat with him, and he said, how much of this is personal? 0%.
Right.
And we were like, what? Don't take away my trauma, my personal stories. And of course, he would never. That's not what he meant. But it was this enlargement of, we're part of a collective. And the things that we're processing are informed by our lineage, our families, our culture, right? They're tuned into, we're picking up on all of these different things. And then we try to understand them through the mind. So we may say, oh, it was because when I was 4, or it's because yesterday, or it's because, but is that really what's happening? I mean, that's what's really fascinating when you start to go down this rabbit hole, is like, where's this come from? So if you're coming from a psychological lens, for example, for all the psychologists out there, or coaches or mentors or people who are in psychotherapy, from a psychologist perspective, we tend to look at our narrative, right? We look at our history. We see what happened to us. We connect dots on it. And that's beautiful, and that's well and good. But then what about when things haven't happened to you? Like, I grew up with this extraordinary fear of being abandoned. Now, I could kind of come up with something in my life, like a few times my dad was so kind of threatening of loss of connection. But honestly, that always felt pretty like I'm reaching for something. But of course, my mother actually was abandoned by her family for years, left alone in a boarding school when she was too young, and her parents never could visit her because they were working 7 days a week and in a much different place than a lot of people might be today. I don't know. She might have even been afraid then that my dad would abandon her after having gone through that with her family of origin, right? And so it was really interesting to see, like, wow, these thoughts I have around abandonment, these fears I have around abandonment, they can't be soothed by me looking at my life story. They can't be located and then therefore released by coming to a particular moment, which sometimes things can be, right? Sometimes things can be.
Not that that's not useful.
Yeah, that's very useful. But they couldn't be soothed that way. And I have many things like that are stored feelings, memories, associations. And I think when we've spoken about it on the show before, there's a lot of research around the neurobiological kind of wiring that happens and mirroring that happens with our primary caregivers. When we look in their eyes, we are downloading their brains and their nervous system, and our brains are sketching like theirs. So that's one way that we can hold the traumas. Of course, there's behavioral ways, right? What they talk about, what they don't talk about, how they punish us, how they reward us, all of those things are kind of hangover patterns from their traumas and their experiences, or their inherited patterns of behavior. And so we're exposed to what the lineage has healed and not healed in that way. And then there's this other way, which is the DNA. So this is where I can get really geeky and kind of down a rabbit hole with this. But I think it was Matt Kahn's talk, The Karmic Return. If you remember, Brooke, correct me if I'm wrong. Remember when we first heard him talk about the body and what's awakening?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that
Right.
is The End of Inner Conflict. It's one of my favorite talks of all time.
Oh, y'all.
We're linking it in the show notes, folks.
Okay. The End of Inner Conflict. Okay. So we know not everybody likes all the same teachers, but for us, this was hot stuff. Okay. So what Matt Kahn was teaching in that, well, he was teaching a lot, but what I wanted to talk about from what he was teaching was the consciousness is already awake. And if you've been really in most traditions, you'll have heard something like that before. You're already awake. Okay, then why don't I feel awake? Why aren't I in some kind of a sustained state of oneness or a sustained state of clarity and truth and love? So Matt said, consciousness is always awake, or it's not what it is. It's always whole, it's always complete, or it's not consciousness. So he said, what is waking up? So then what is waking up? If consciousness is already awake, what's waking up? Because we hear awakening as a verb, right? As a process. And he said, the body, the body. Now, if you all have been listening to us a while, you know that in many ways, Brooke and I would fall into body nerds. You can call us tantrikas because we value the body. You can call us somatic meditators. They're all just labels, but we've always had a fascination with the relationship between the body and spirituality. Mm-hmm. Well, even when we used to do Dharma ocean practices, we would say karma is something stored in the body. Mm-hmm. It's a stored experience in the body, right? Well, what is DNA? It is a stored impression of your lineage's gifts and traumas, what they've processed and what they were unable to process, what was too big for them to process. It is a living record of memory that was handed to us. Now, thank God, at the same time as I'm saying this, we also know about epigenetics, and so there's plenty of hope. But let me just stick with the DNA for a second. This is a burgeoning field, so it's still new, but even science is showing some studies to say in animals, they're observing 14 generations that a trauma could affect the DNA. They have done studies on famine survivors, like the family, the kids and grandchildren of famine survivors. They have done studies on Holocaust survivor children and grandchildren, which I have met many personally, probably many of you have. And I have worked with them clinically and have seen that they have symptoms of PTSD without ever having gone through any major trauma in their life. For them to have the perspective that they're healing stuff from their lineage has been very relieving, because they keep thinking otherwise, what the fuck is the matter with me? Like I must have a real problem. How could I not be feeling better when my life has been pretty blessed, right? Or pretty good. So 14 generations. Now take it for what it's worth, right? That's animal studies. But when you get into the mystical sciences and the metaphysical sciences, they will talk about the exact same thing. The first two strands of DNA are these kind of records. They're records. And that's part of what we can call karma. For all we know, that's what our past lives are. I don't know that that's just what our past lives are. There's multiple timelines, perhaps, yada, yada. That's not something I have access to personally, but that's pretty wild to think of, right? Like it's that foundational, that it's not just in our neurobiology, it's not just in our neurochemistry, but that the very tiniest and most influential aspect of every cell of our body is holding a memory of our ancestors.
And I think when it's coming up to be healed, and you'll have to tell me if you agree with this or not, it feels a lot like the same way that pre-verbal trauma would feel. So trauma that occurs before you have words. It's kind of, it's very much a feeling. It's very, very somatic. It's very intensely somatic. It's very sensation-based. It's very nebulous. And whenever you try and pin a tidy story on it, this happened. And so then this happened. And so this is why I'm like this, that it just doesn't stick. You can feel that it's fabricating, and it also doesn't help, to come up with a story, not fabricating, but kind of connecting dots that don't point to why is this feeling happening. And that because it has this nebulous quality, it's just profoundly sensate in the body, that it really is the ultimate, like, you just got to feel it, right? Like, and I don't know for how long, right? There's no guarantee of like, you're going to sit with the feeling and it'll be gone for sure within 24 hours, right? There's no, it's really humbling. It's really humbling. And it's the places that I continue to find where it's like my attempts to get it together, or my attempts to have a better protocol, that I can follow, just fall apart, because it's just a matter of, this is in here. This is a part of my experience. And I don't know why. And I'm just clearing it. And sometimes I do get glimpses of why. I've had that a few times, where it's like I'm given a tour, a video tour by source of where it comes from, but it's that journeying kind of feeling, it's not a part of normal life. And that's helpful because it frees up space. It stops me from doing this dog chasing its tail thing where it's like, what's going on? What's going on? How do I fix it? Why haven't I fixed it? It's like, oh, okay. Like, this is just in here. And it's not necessarily about me. Like you were saying earlier, lineage stuff does get passed down through behavior, the way we were treated, by our family, for sure. But that it's more than that. That it's deeper than that too.
I know, that's the mysterious part. It's like I have a lot of theories about it, or I've listened to a lot of good ideas about it. But how can we right now really separate the behavioral component? The words our lineage said to us, grandparents, parents, cousins, whatever it is, the neurobiology, the genetics, right? And in a way, it's like you don't have to. Right? One of the liberating things about seeing healing through the lens of healing the traumatic patterning from your ancestors, from the lineage, is that I don't know, empathic people, energetically sensitive people, spiritually sensitive people, we can have a really wonky relationship to ourselves. It's almost like what you were pointing out earlier, Brooke. What's the matter with me is almost like our hobby question, almost like, right? It's like, it's our pastime, right? Like, what's the matter with me? And we have so many ideas about what's the matter with us that when we're confronted with something, it might be terror, it might be, panic or grief or aloneness, whatever we're confronted with, that story can rush in so quickly. Oh, there's something wrong that I'm feeling this, or life doesn't love me, or so-and-so doesn't feel this anymore. Or just, I don't know, whatever the way the somehow I'm doing it wrong experience can come in, it can come in. But if you try on for size this idea that we're more than these bodies, that we are actually remembering our divine origins, right? Because sometimes I think to myself lately, like, well, what is spirituality if it's not a relationship with the divine, right? It's not just about healing trauma. We talk about that a lot because what we've noticed in our journeys is it's the traumas, it's the constrictions that arose as a result of traumas that were kind of inhibiting us from remembering, from connection with oneness and the divine. So we talk a lot about that, but what it really is at the end is remembering who you really are, connecting with the other, the more, the greater, the larger, the universe, if you want to call it that. And if we were to try on for size, that we are here, I hope, elevating the consciousness of this species. And that one of the ways we're doing that is we're clearing out the misunderstandings and the pain, and we're blessing it, and we're forgiving, and we're loving, and we're having compassion for it. Then you, instead of getting caught in the small self story of I'm unworthy, I'm not capable, I'm too small, I'm too overburdened, you are relating with this other aspect of experience. Call it your soul, call it your light, call it your higher self. But you're now coming into relationship with that. And now you are something larger that is blessing the pain as it arises in you, blessing the feelings, emoting with it, loving it, bringing compassion to it, bringing light to it. And that's a very different experience than the one that has arisen for me in the past, where an emotion comes up, but with that emotion comes the belief, I'm bad, I've done something wrong, and then the shame, kind of cruds it all into some gunky, dense contraction that I can barely feel or tolerate. And then I'm just trying to fix it. And then I'm turning away from it, right? And it keeps getting more and more convoluted. But if you're capable, if it's ripe for you now to hold this like grander view that I am a part of this collective of the oneness, and I have access to source within me. And that from there, I can meet any feeling, any energy that's rising through me with the light of loving eyes, or with the feeling of welcome. It has a different quality. It's not, I wouldn't say it's just easy for me, but there's more ease than the alternative that I described.
Yeah, than the small self point of view. Yeah, what did Matt say in that talk, we are the angel for this body? I always love that one. You know, that when we can be aware of what's going on in here, when awareness is able to keep track of that we become the angel for this body. And, you know, to your point about DNA, and that our bodies are crafted from our ancestors, which includes their traumas, sometimes that can feel a little claustrophobic. So I would just say, you know, we can also think of it as being the angels for our ancestors. You know, I've had a couple of experiences where I feel really tangibly about certain things that are just, for whatever reason, core to my life story. I just, you know, we all have those categories where we really want to figure out this thing. You know, for some people, it's like having a soulmate love of your life experience. For me, it's been stuff around money and finance and safety and worthiness. Like I can be here. I can do it. I can pull it off. Right. And I have been shown the ways that this plays through my lineage. I mean, sometimes it's because of stories I actually know about people. And sometimes it's, you know, literally being shown like film footage, right, of stuff that went on down the line. Me, my mom, my grandfather, his mother, his grandfather, and on and on and on back. And that if I'm here and I have a life that has, you know, in my case, way more privilege than what they had, way more safety, way more agency. I mean, and even just as a woman in this day and age, like it's still a shit show, but it is a lot better than it used to be. Like I have a lot more access to power, to support, to healing than they did. You know, my lineage was a lot of, you know, you get disowned by your family, and then there's the famine, and then you go steerage, and then your husband dies, and then you're raising 6 kids, and then it's the depression. And it's just like, and then you're working the railroads, and then like on and on and on and on and on. So there was a lot of like, do you find that there's certain phrases? Like I find that there's certain phrases, we had talked a little bit about this earlier, that don't feel like mine, but they play like a tape recorder through me. And so one of them for me has been, I don't know how to do this. I can't do this all by myself. And I can take a phrase like that and apply it to my psychological history and be like, sure, grew up family with alcoholism and, okay. But it's like, okay, I also had, heat and food and parents who had a lot of growing up to do, but I knew that they loved me and supported me. It's like, I don't know.
It's like I was saying before about like the abandonment issue and my dad, like, I feel like I'm grasping at straws a little.
I had parents that were like, you can be anything you want. Women are powerful. Here's money for college. So it's kind of like, really? Like, I don't know. But when I look at it through the lens of my lineage, oh my God, like the stuff they had to face. I mean, seriously. Crazy shit. Like I remember just a little sneak peek. My grandmother telling me she was the youngest of 6, single mom. We had a lot of working single mom situations through the lineage too. Go figure. And her sisters, she and her sisters brought a kitten home because they wanted a pet. Her mother turned away from the stove, stepped on its neck and killed it and went back to stirring the pot. They would take in from the local state asylum patients who they didn't want to keep there in their home because the state would pay them with 6 young daughters, like crazy shit. So this whole, and in a new country, in the Depression, of course, there's this feeling of like, I cannot do this all by myself. I'm going to die. I can't carry this. It's too much. And that's what like plays through me like a tape. And it's so helpful to be like, that's not mine. And congratulations, everyone. I can stand up for you. I have so much more. Like they can time travel through me and hopefully get to have an experience or many experiences of fulfillment that were never going to be a part of their life story because it was a shit show, So I get to be the angel for my ancestors as well. I get to be the hero for the lineage, which goes all the way back to the Big Bang. Just a reminder. But if we get way closer than that into the family tree, it's a great honor and a great privilege to be able to have experiences of this world that they really longed for and that were really out of reach. And I can do that for them, which is also a nice call to healing that's different than the sort of self-absorbed healing path. It's a lot different.
It's kind of nice to step out of ourselves sometimes. Remember at one point in our episodes, I had shared something that Thomas Hubel, who's a mystic and does a lot of work with healing lineages and traumas. For example, he lives in Germany and he works a lot with people in Germany on healing the traumas of World War I and World War II. And he said what he notices is that the people who have space are the ones who'll do the healing. And what I mean in this case, I'm not talking about empaths and energetically sensitive people per se. I'm talking about when the trauma and the pressure abate enough, it will come up to be healed. So if you think about, for many of us, especially in our age group, Brooke, just look back 1 or 2 generations and there's trauma, like big time trauma, immigrants and stuff like that. And we're white in the United States. If you're coming from a different lineage, you can look back 2 generations and there's so much, right? There's so much. And so what happens is, when you're in fight, flight, and when you're in really difficult circumstances and the external pressures are on, you're escaping your country, maybe, or, all sorts of crazy things, you don't have the time and space to process. You're not going to breathe. You have to survive, right? And so it's almost like the generation of people who finally are blessed enough and privileged enough to like slow down and breathe, maybe have some support, have a little spaciousness in their minds and in their beings, a little safety, a little more than anyone before, will start to have these things rise to the surface. They'll start to unearth. And so it's a really just interesting perspective. But additionally, what I wanted to say when you were talking, that just like arose at the end of what you were saying, is sometimes I think as well, when you have this really long view, it brings compassion for your family, for your lineage. And then hopefully by proxy, it can expand your compassion in multiple ways, just for what humans go through and what we suffer with. When I look at, for example, just my parents' generation, so my parents are 77 now, and what was happening in the times, it was like the drills where they were going under desks and they were getting drafted into wars. And if you weren't married with kids, you were really abnormal. And homosexuality was in the DSM as a disorder. And
very recently.
Yeah. If people went to therapy, they were ashamed. Like they had a mental illness. Mental illness was something people looked down upon. I mean, there was so much division, so much us versus them, so much fear of safety, so much restriction around access to insight and wisdom, right? Like that didn't even really come around till like the 60s in the United States. I know other parts of the world have a different story, but it didn't come around till the 60s, 70s. And so if they were already very ingrained, they were Depression era kids, right? Dealing with all this fear. So as you start to realize some of what you're healing, and that's just my parents, I didn't even get to my grandparents, right? And what they were going through and how they got pulled out of school in 3rd or 4th grade to work and all of those different things. It can start to open up new layers of understanding and compassion if your family's alive, for the people you're dealing with, if they've passed, in your intimate relationship with them on the other side. And, how many times should you and I say the same thing? But it's always worth repeating. If there's anything I can say with certainty, it is that finding greater levels of compassion and love within yourself, for yourself and for others is the transformative agent, is the most transformative experience.
Yeah, that we're all sitting here with different kinds of lineage wounds, and we're all metabolizing that the best that we can, and that literally we're doing the best that we can, that everybody, and I mean everybody, is doing the best that they can, which is just sort of an interesting inquiry. I talked about this with you in a recent episode. Forgive me, listeners, if I'm being repetitive, but Brene Brown, I think she was on Under the Skin with Russell Brand. And she was talking about this question: do you think people are doing the best that they can? And I think she was using it as a research question. I can't remember specifically what she was researching. It'd be helpful for my punchline here if I could remember what she was researching. Guess what, folks? I'll link to the interview in the show notes. But she was talking about her own process and her husband's process around this question, and I think she was linking it to self-righteousness, and that people who are self-righteous are more closed off, to other people, and that people who are self-righteous do not believe that people are doing the best that they can, and that those who do believe that everybody is doing the best that they can have the opposite of self-righteousness, which is compassion, genuine compassion. And it's sort of cute to say, right? It's very Hallmark. Everyone's doing the best they can. I did not believe that until very recently. And that was a hard road, actually, for me to get there. But getting through the eye of the needle on that one to like, wow, we're all sitting with a lot, and we're all really, no matter what it is we're doing, no matter how we're behaving, even if we're the worst, most hardened criminal, that person was doing the best that they could. That was as much as they could metabolize in their nervous system.
Or how contracted their worldview was, how contracted.
Yeah, it was as much room. There was no room for something to come up and through for healing Because like you're describing, there's this contraction. There's no spaciousness in a highly unconscious person. And that's what they've got. I don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
But for those of us who have more roominess, right, and more things are coming up and healing, it can be really helpful to sit with that question. Like, do we think people are doing the best that they can? And do we think we are? Mm-hmm. Can we turn it towards ourselves? Can we be a little more merciful? Like, we're doing a lot. We're healing our own tiny, tiny little lives within the scope of all of history, right? And all the way through the lineage, because we have the space to do that for whatever reason. Can we be merciful and say like, wow, I am really, this still hurts. I still have mornings where I wake up feeling like this, or I still keep having this repetitive thought or behavior, but I'm genuinely doing the best that I can. I'm really leaning in when I can, as I can.
Right. Oh, that's such a big question. I mean, that's one people may have a lot of mixed feelings on, and it's
for sure,
great.
As
just
they should.
Let it, yeah, and let that be an inquiry for you, because it's a really big question. It's not one that should be treated lightly or decided upon lightly, because this is not a Pollyanna universe. I mean, the level of unconsciousness that is still present in the human race is kind of astounding and
shocking.
And yet I still say, perhaps it's optimistic of me, I think we're becoming more conscious. I think that's why a podcast like this exists, and many podcasts like this exist, and people are sharing honestly, and people are having realizations and awakening that I never would have thought. I mean, people I knew from high school just, coming forward, and I'm starting to see on their social media, the kinds of awarenesses that are coming in. So anyway, I like to believe that. But even with that, the level of unconsciousness is really big.
Yeah. And
that's one way to shine, to understand this, is that we're shining the light of consciousness onto the unconscious, right? The human species has a lot in the basement, right? The human species has a lot in the basement. And when we are waking up, when we are coming into communion with who we really are, what we really are, with Source, with whatever, God, when we're coming into communion with that, we are becoming the light of consciousness. That's why they call it the light, shining down on the shadow, on the unconscious that's very real in the human body, in this 3D reality that does exist with bodies in it, that it's becoming really clear. So, man, I mean, sometimes you think, Frard, how the hell am I going to heal this? But really, life will just give you exactly what you need to heal. So it's not like, okay, now I got to go heal everything in the basement of this screwed up human species.
Right.
But it's life will give you what it's asking for you to breathe light into, and to meet, and to accept, and to find compassion for. Like, it will bring it to you, and you will meet it at that time. And I think I don't have probably the most experienced and articulate answer around how does one heal ancestral trauma. I think there's people who are pretty specialized in this. And these days, there's mystics who clear and activate DNA. Matt Kahn actually does a lot of clearings and activations. He just doesn't talk about it being of the body and DNA, but he'll sprinkle in ancestral stuff and human lineage stuff a lot. And their shamans have done this for ages, worked with clearing lineages and everything. So I'm sure there are a lot of answers that are even deeper than what I'm about to say. But it's almost like, how do we meet nonverbal trauma, as you were pointing to before, Brooke? Many people have traumas that are birth injury traumas, as you obviously well know. People have traumas that are embryonic, right? Like, there is research to show that babies in utero, when a mom is exposed to war, have higher incidences of schizophrenia and such like that, right? Like there are effects that we won't remember unless we're taken on a journey by our higher self, or we get hypnotized, or we work with a shaman or something like this. But so for all these pre-verbal memories that we don't have the privilege of getting kind of cognitive insight on, we just breathe. We allow the emotions to surface. We anchor. We love. And we have compassion for. And we breathe. And we breathe a lot.
Yeah.
Right. And we allow the light to come through us, and we allow the energy to be there and move. And so it's kind of the same. What we're looking to do here, though, is release the concretization that ideas and stories could have, because not every emotion that you feel will be able to be described. And sometimes we're just making stuff up, and it's not always helpful.
Yeah. And that in this process, I just want to make sure I'm being clear about this. Everyone's doing the best they can, that it's not interpreted as that this process of healing, or that seeing from that point of view is just such great news. It's great news. We're really all doing the best we can. That this process it has a lot of grief. Even just healing through the lineage, these sort of pre-verbal, can't pin it down with words because it's not our story, that there's grieving too, that as these and things anger. Come forward, and anger, all of these things. So the spaciousness is for all of those emotions, those darker emotions that we don't value in our culture, have a chance to exist as well. That's just a part of the process. I wish I could say that that's not, that it's like something heals and clears, and then we feel amazing, and we feel amazing forever. No. But I've found that it's like a really sacred grieving, truly, not personal grieving. It doesn't feel connected at all to my personal story or my psychological history. It's like a love, a deep compassion, and a grief for all of humanity, that we're all in this.
Well, sure, because even if you were to hold a worldview that said people are doing the best they can, even if that resonated for you, sometimes people's best is terrible, or horrifying. Not enough, or violent or harmful. And so we're going to have different emotions come up, and we're going to have different beliefs come up in relationship to that. And we're going to have complex experience, right? That's just what it is. And it's not accepting what happened, like, oh, I'm okay with that. It's accepting that these feelings are rising up in me in relationship to this larger experience of life. Some of it on behalf of myself, some of it maybe on behalf of someone else or in my lineage. We're just talking about some really deep stuff. But I know, for me, like, when I can start to see it this way, right? So let's say I'm sitting with grief, or I'm sitting with terror, or I'm sitting with fear, or I hear a belief system, like you were saying before, Brooke, like these don't feel like my words, when that's happening, and I feel the depth of whatever form of agony I'm experiencing at that time, and I realize, oh, wow, my mom probably felt this, or my dad probably felt this, or my grandparents, or all of them. It just can soften a little bit the relationship to them, because it's like, wow, the things we carry, right? Like the things we human carry. And I know for me, I am a very blessed and privileged person where I have a lot of spaciousness actually in my life, time, money. And I just came into the world, as most energetically sensitive people do, with a lot of awareness, and a lot of natural aptitude for compassion and for forgiveness and for love. And look how big this is for me. I can't imagine what my parents must have been going through if they were feeling this very thing. No wonder they worked all the time. That's not what the story of my parents, but for someone else, no wonder they worked all the time. No wonder they couldn't say they loved me. Right.
Yeah.
Whatever.
No wonder
the
why
case
there's
is.
addiction. No wonder, all of these things that live in unconsciousness acting out in violence, that these are acts of profound unconsciousness, and that's as much as was tolerable to be felt. And so
they found ways to escape the feelings, as we often do. And the same applies for us. Okay. So taking this back to us, none of these things are excuses or justifications or rationalizations, not even for us, right? If you're creating harmful behavior, aspire to be less harmful, right?
And never tolerate abuse. And
never
just want to say, we have to acknowledge or commit abuse, that we're in a culture that is abusive, particularly to marginalized groups, right? So we can't get away from that either, that there is abuse acted out in the name of culture for generations. So it's really deep stuff. But when it comes to ourselves, how many of us have a clean slate? How many of us have not done something that we have never done something we wish we didn't do, or said something we wish we didn't say, or hurt someone's feelings, or lied, did something, right? So even as you're listening to this, it's meant to put you in a larger view as well, right? Mm-hmm. Like you were talking about with, it might put your family in a larger view, but it's meant to put you in a larger view. Like there really is a truth. It's kind of both, right? Like we're agents of free will and we're products of our lives, right? We're products of our culture and family and upbringing, right? We are affected, we are impacted, we are influenced, right? So we're products of that, and we are beings with agency. Hopefully, we have free will. We are souls, right? We are empowered beings, and both are true at exactly the same time. So we've been affected, and if you are playing out some of your family's trauma, then I have a lot of love for you, and I have a lot of heart for you, and I have a lot of understanding, because I've certainly done it. I mean, in my family, one of the patterns of trauma is rage. And I have showed up in blackout rages. I mean, blackout rages in my life where, even not too long ago, out of the blue, someone said something to me, it tripped my rage wire, and I just could have torn this person apart. Luckily, I was interrupted, and that was enough to wake me up. Mm-hmm. Like that was all I needed. But when I felt it inside of me, I'm like, what? Like, this is not who I consciously am. But there is a very long history of rage. In part, it's my life. In part, it's just having been, over-controlled and over-manipulated. But in part, it's just the tension that a lot of my family members have been working through, mm-hmm. for a really long time. And, it's hard to see in yourself, right? Most people who listen to this show, and certainly you and I, Brooke, we are fairly conscious people. We try to be, at least. And we try to be kind and loving and good and upstanding and all of those different things. And when you see in yourself, like, wow, I'm doing something I would never consciously choose, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever that is, okay, fine. We need a reckoning, right? Like we have to have a reckoning with ourselves if we see we're doing something harmful. But in the light of love, can we hold ourselves in a larger perspective of what shaped us, mm-hmm. Of what has brought us to this point where we may do something unconsciously that in the light of our conscious mind, we would never choose for ourselves. Yeah. Yeah. So hopefully this is not the world's biggest bummer New Year's Day episode ever, but instead is an invitation to being really compassionate towards ourselves and really compassionate towards humanity.
Yeah. and really understanding, because this is just part of, I guess the last thing I want to say, which sounds redundant, but it's just, I do believe, some people are saying 2020 is going to be a big year. Energies are up and, we're all going to be really activating. And I don't know anything about that per se for myself, but I can see it around me. People going to therapy that weren't going before, and people having insights that weren't having before. So it feels like things are intensifying, right? Yeah. And sometimes it's almost like we are in the state of oneness and in the state of the collective, we are exposed to the intensification without having the insight and the wisdom of how to walk ourselves through that.
Yeah.
And just the beginning of understanding, like, oh, maybe this isn't about me. Mm-hmm. Like maybe this has nothing to do with my personal life. Maybe this isn't just my pain, can just change your whole reality in terms of how you meet it, how you heal it, and the type of support that you seek.
Thank you so much for being a part of our community and for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. That is also where you can subscribe to get our weekly digest of what we're up to and other resources that we're currently finding helpful. If you're wanting more support, blissandgrit.com also has more information on our private coaching practices. We're so grateful for the reviews you've written, for the membership support that so many of you have provided at Patreon, and for all the notes that you send. Thank you. We'll be back next week.